right now, to kickstart the discussion, okay, we wanted to have a small part in which they are going to discuss what's the view on architecture, and then we'll kickstart the round panel, okay? Opening the floor for everybody. Yeah? Any questions so far? No? All right. Yeah? Are we focused? Does everybody understand what the format is? Yeah? Okay. Do we all know what the question or the main topic is about for today? Who can tell me? So who can tell me what the topic is for today? No, not even David knows. So this is difficult.
The role of an architect in a company. Yeah.
All right, all right. So who wants to take the other mic?
I start? Yep. Yeah. I start. So very quickly, hi, I'm Thomas, everyone. I'm from Paris, which is why this entire thing is happening in English. So if you need someone to blame, it's me. Sorry.
Thank you, Thomas.
It's good for you, it's good for you, it's good for you. So, a role of an architect in a company. Could we have picked a broader subject? I don't know. It's already a broad subject. Sarah told you earlier there's 1,000 of us in vpTech. There's 1,000 people in vpTech, not in Privalia and the group. It's just people who work on software and building things, right? So I've been in the industry for 15 years, about 15 years. And I've been doing architecture for officially 3 or 4 of them. But I believe we've all been doing architecture from the get-go, right? I'd like to open up with a question. Do we have architects sitting here already? Raise your hand if you're an architect. You're not an architect, huh? So first off, a question for the few architects who raised their hand. What was your feeling about architects when you were you all came from development, right? Or the architect came from development? What was your feeling about architects when you were developing? Good or bad? Which is one of the main questions I have. So the guys who are not architects, what are you doing? What's your job? What do you do every day? Come on. No one? Developers? All of them? Developers, raise your hand. Heads. So what do you want to know about architecture? Do you want to become an architect? Is it something you want to do? Yeah? Yes. So
Why?
May I point out one point of view of mine? To me, to be an architect is just to be very interested about software architecture. It's not like a degree, a military degree, you know. Just was to point out this.
Test? No, this not work. Yeah, really. Why do you want to be an architect? That's a good question.
So, just to get this going, right? The big question, I mean, if you were here, you probably went on the internet at some point and typed, what is the role of an architect? Or architect job description, or day-to-day of an architect, and things like this. And if you read through them, you come up with a lot of answers, right? And they're all boring, and I don't know if that's really what you want to do. Someone said ivory tower architect, right? Sorry. Someone said ivory tower architect. Personally, when I was a developer, I hated all the architects I ran across, all of them. Not one of them, right? So I didn't want to become an architect. It's not something I wanted in my career. It wasn't in the books at all. I just wanted to be a tech expert. I wanted to play around with software and tech. So when vpTech actually pushed me towards architecture, there was a lot of pushback from me. I didn't want to become an architect because I like doing stuff and I like participating in building stuff. So the first thing is, a good architect is not going to give this part up. That's not part of what I do, at least the way I do the job. And I think it's interesting that this is not a presentation but a roundtable, because in my book at least, there is no definition of what is an architect correctly. There's a few checkboxes that you can add there. Yes, technology expert. Yes, okay. Can draw designs with boxes and arrows. Yes, okay. Nobody understands them. Yes, okay as well. Okay, yeah, there's a few checkboxes in there, but there's no clear definition. And I hope
and this is not what is to be an architect.
Yep. But which one? Which part?
Is everything unknown of the...
Yeah. I trying to confuse them even more? Is that,
of course.
I think what David is hitting on is that there is no one answer, and it's actually interesting that how many people do you have in your company?
Well, we are 31. I think something like 25 technicians and the rest, like marketing and so on, and accountability and accountancy. And well, there's our structure is a little bit more fluid than the structure of Vente-privee, I suppose, because we are our teams are changing based on the project we are doing in a moment in time. So my role is also continuously changing, and I'm also a consultant. So well, I will try to find a way to explain what I do, if you want. It's about I have to focus my time on the problematic part of the projects and on the hard stuff. I say maybe trying that stuff not going terribly wrong, basically. And to focus means for me to have a method of getting close to the core problems or the core issues or the core design decisions, strategical decisions as well. And for me, that method is I call it Socratic method. Is based upon questions, basically, making many questions, very silly questions, and also questioning not only the team but also the system. When I have problems, I have to study experiments to question the system, but maybe this is because I have to optimize my time in each team. Okay, I don't know if
that makes sense.
Was pertinent.
You talked about system, and I think that's a very important part of the definition. An architect is never going to do the same job depending on the size of the team and depending on the scope of what you're working on, right? Things are ever going to change. Like 1,000 people, you don't deal with 1,000. There's 1,000 people and there's 16 architects. I think there's 16 of us inside of the whole company.
15, I think.
15? Did someone get fired? Is it me? Yeah. Well, no, but joking aside, it's a huge company. There's a lot to do, and you don't interact with people on the same level. When there's 1,000 of you, when there's 100 of you, or when there's 50 of you. I'd even argue that when you go below 30, I don't know if having an architect actually makes sense, because depending on what you're doing, you're all supposed to be owner of the stack, right? The architect is not the owner of the stack. The developer is the owner of the stack. The architect just tries to make it work on a large scale. And scale is an important factor on the system side as well. System can mean anything. When you're talking software, software is a system. It's a lot of components that interact together. When you're talking a couple of software that actually give business one value, it's also a system. It's a system of multiple software, which are made of components. And when you're talking about a company is also a system. It's multiple bricks that compose of software, compose of component, make things work. So I have these multiple degrees that you can look at things. You have the first level, which is basic software architecture, and then you have the very high level, which is when we start talking enterprise architecture, which is much higher level. But at the end of the day, you're not the owner, you're just a facilitator as an architect. I don't feel like I'm the owner of what is actually being produced, which is frustrating. Coming from development, I'll be honest, it's very frustrating, especially when you're used to putting things into production and seeing things run and talking to the users. It's frustrating taking this step back, but it's very rewarding seeing the big picture work, right? We're all in this for the puzzle at some point. Well, at least I'm in it for the puzzle. I don't know what you guys are in it for. And seeing everything work together is very rewarding, but takes a step.
But for me, in the day-to-day work, the real thing is I have to figure out my job every day. Every day is different. I have work for 3 people, just for myself, but I have to decide what is the most important thing in every moment. I have to work with the developers to set good practices, to help them to adopt new technologies. Also, I have to test new technologies. I have to work with the product owners to define the technical roadmap of the products. I have to work with other architects to define guidelines or anything. I have to work with the IT lead in the whatever. Okay, and every day is different. This is, we don't have a clear backlog of everything, okay? Yes, we have a backlog of things to do, but it's not clear, and there is no one to prioritize your job. You have to figure out what do you have to do every day. This is, I think this is very important, at least in a company with the size of ours. Maybe in a small company, it's most clear what the architect does.
It's worse.
Yeah, because the architect does everything in a small company, yeah. That's the real thing. What is my job? It depends. I have to do everything, since see the code with the developer, try to convince the SREs to test new technology, talk to the other architects about the best way to communicate microservices or whatever, and everything at the same time, and changing from day to day.
You said microservices, that's a forbidden word. You say. He said microservices, and that's a forbidden word. We don't say microservices anymore.
I agree.
We're not allowed to say it.
Sick and tired of hearing about microservices. Please, God, let's not talk about microservices, please. If you guys have questions, willing to answer any of them. But if there's microservices in the questions, I'm standing up and leaving. Okay.
I think some architect from here can explain, like us, what they are doing. No.
So if I may interrupt after this very quick introduction, this is an event based on collaboration, right? So we have these 3 wonderful people here willing to, you get the point, right? So we have wonderful people here willing to answer our questions and willing to guide the discussion, but it's also up to us to see the discussion with things, right? Otherwise, they're going to be talking about why microservices are not cool and what, etc., right? So it's our duty to ask them good questions. So I think you had a question coming up.
Yeah, I have a question. The question is, it's just a quick question. So the question is whether we have different types of architecture roles, because I heard that there might be enterprise architecture role, solution architect, and other kind of architects. So what kind of architect you are, and do you think we have multiple architecture roles?
Yeah, more or less. No, in fact, yes, the solution architect is more focused in the software solution. The enterprise architect is more focused in the functionality, in the boundaries of the products, with the how everything works together and so. But at some point, all the architects do more or less the same. The different thing is where they put the focus in the day-to-day. But the architect has to be technician, has to be functional, has to be everything, at least in my opinion, because all people expect from you to do different roles. Okay, the developers expect that you help them to do whatever. The SRE is the same. The other architects or the product owners thinks you know all the system in the company. So, but the enterprise architect has to be more focused in this, in have the boundaries, the functionality of everything, and so. And the solutions architect is more focused in the maybe in the technical part, in how to get the things done. I mean.
Okay, if I don't have enough soft skills and I'm a technical guy, I like to dig into complex systems. So do you think I have a chance to become an architect, or I should practice some soft skills and do more conversation, attend conferences and share knowledge? What kind of skills should I have?
You have to be, you have to communicate to each other. Many people expect this from the architect.
Yeah, that's actually kind of a tricky question, because communication is very important. When you're an architect, like I said, you're not doing anything. And in reality, I'm not doing anything. Right? All I'm doing is helping people achieve their goals, which is nice on paper, but in reality, I'm not doing anything.
I might just draw UML diagrams and send it by email, for instance. It would be wonderful design.
Yeah, remember when I said the checkboxes does diagrams that no one understands? I'm not kidding. Most of the diagrams you're going to do, no one is going to understand them if you're not sitting next to him explaining what it means. Because it makes sense in our head, doesn't make sense to most of the POs you throw it at, for example. Soft skills and communication are two very different things. Everyone loves this word, soft skills. He has great soft skills. You can be very transparent, very clear, and have garbage soft skills, right? It doesn't link together. Be clear in what you're saying, be clear in how you say it. Know what you don't know. That's one of the key factors. It's when you don't know something, don't pretend that you do, or don't try to, be very clear. I don't know this, and say it like this, and you'll do fine, and you will do fine. Depending on how far you want to go, like enterprise architecture, you stop doing, I'm doing a lot of enterprise architecture today, right? And you start seeing way less tech in everything you do every day. But from what you're saying, I don't think that's something you want to do. So I'm talking way more with a composition of applications, so I'm not digging deeper into the components, and I'm talking way more to the business and way more to the people who are going to do things, but in high-level stuff. Like you are going to plug, I don't know, the order management system to the checkout in this way, and it needs to communicate this information, but this piece of data cannot go to this system. It needs to stay there, and it stops there. I'm never going to talk about Kafka. I'm never going to talk about containers. This is where I'm going to stop. Now, if I'm going to start talking with the people who are going to implement this, then I'm going to take another hat, and then I'm going to start talking tech, because I'm talking to the tech people. But this job is more of David's focus today. David does a lot of tech stuff. I do a lot of enterprise architect stuff. So the question you asked earlier, yes, there's multiple hats. I don't think you can go to the enterprise level without having gone at least to the software architecture and component level and so on. It's a matter of steps. But then it's what you want to do as well, right? I had a lot of problem letting go of a lot of the tech things and putting things into production. That was a big problem for me at the start, but I feel comfortable with it now because I got other things out of it.
Okay, and I have another question. How do you think for modern architecture, should people know more than just software development, like DevOps or artificial intelligence, because it becomes modern?
Well, the question is if we should study this new stuff. I think so, yes. I'm personally studying everything of that. Yes, but not because they are new, because they are interesting and you have to deal with them. For instance, I'm now in a machine learning project, a project very based on computer vision, machine learning. I need to know what's going inside components. Anyway, they are still components for me. For me, the focus is to organize the system and to make the system work. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, yeah, okay, thank you. For now, I will stop asking questions.
Now it's my turn. Hi. Sorry. Damn it. And I have the camera on. No, sorry. My role is more into the product owner side, but I have a question on, because sometimes we always hear that architectures are the one that gives the solution and have the answers and so on. At least that's what I've been hearing. But at the same time, we have the development teams that are currently working on the product itself. So how it's supposed to be the communication between architects and devs, because depending on the people that you've been working on, you always see that they have their vision and that's it. But others can be more inclusive and communicating. So what's your point of view about that?
May I try to understand to answer? I don't know if I can answer your question because it's quite complex and a huge topic. But I want to say just one point that may help, which is that we, as architects, are not simply engineers receiving requirements. We are negotiating requirements. That implies that we are translating technical requirements to functional or non-functional requirements in a language a product owner can understand. And it's an important part of our job, I think. I don't know if they agree or if...
Yeah, but I wasn't focusing on my role exactly. I was focusing, for example, on my teams, that they are working currently on the solutions that are being implemented, in this case on Veepee as well. So I was wondering how it should be the communication and relationship between the developers and the architects, not the product.
Okay. I think the developers have the vision only of what they are developing, okay? Or maybe in the product, not in the module, but in the product they are responsible of. But the architect must have the vision of more big vision of what is going on the company, okay? And for the day-to-day, the developer should work with the architect on the tech definition or whatever, and the architect and the product owner should talk in the future of the products and how to connect products with other products and things like that, okay? But usually the developers only have the vision of what they are doing and don't care about how to connect things or things like that. That's my point.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of agree, but the second part is, you're gonna hate me for this, but it depends. It really depends. It depends on the maturity of the team. It depends on the maturity of the lead developer. Depends on the context of your company. Like we have an annoying role in our company because there's so many of us where we try to rein in technology. Just a bit of history because it makes sense. Like 4 years ago, Vente-privee, the French company, was a full Microsoft company. So it was .NET on Windows Server with SQL Server, and that's it. And no playing outside of these technologies. Like if you mentioned anything else, you would get shot. If you look at this now, this isn't a joke, right? All these technologies and all these stacks, they are actually in production today. So we went from one end and completely to the other one, right? But completely to the other. Some of you might, especially those who do architecture, if you look at this, you should be saying this looks like a goddamn nightmare. Because there's multiple coding languages, multiple storage stacks, multiple deployment stacks, everything on one thing, and I just told you that's in production in our company. It's not multiple companies, it's one company, right? So we went too far. Like we opened up the doors to everything, we have everything in production, everything. So now our job is trying to make sense of it, because how do you encourage people sharing stuff because you know developers, right? And you do know that someone is going to hate Go, and someone is going to hate Node. And maybe the guy who hates Go hates Node, and the guy who hates Node hates Go. So they are going to yell at each other all day, and they're going to have these religious discussions that never end, right? this is not productive. And if I want to have people grow and I want to change teams, if they want to switch subjects, and I want to give them opportunities inside the company, it helps if they actually speak the same language. So we need to not go monoculture again, but maybe not do everything under the sun and come somewhere in the middle. So we are the gatekeepers. Architects are trying to make sense of this. Like we all have in charge like 5 or 6 products, and we talk to 5 or 6 specific teams, and we try to rein them in and make sure that at least these teams have the same language and the same stack. And it's not easy once you go from there, right? It's not easy. This is one job that we do at the company because we had a maturity problem at some point. I know that a couple of teams in the company, we don't coach them at all technology-wise because they are expert in their stacks. They know what they need to do. They showed us their first architecture saying, is this a good idea? And we didn't say, yes, this is good, and put a check. We said, this looks good, go for it, and you maintain it, and you do it. So it depends. There's no clear-cut answer for me.
Okay, just because I was wondering on how we could encourage new developers to aspire an architectural if we don't give them some flexibility to show actually the work. That's it.
I don't think any architect is ever going to shoot down a developer who proposes things. So that's never going to be, because again, we all came from there. And I started off saying I never wanted to be an architect to start with. It just happened.
And for you, how the switch happen? Because it wasn't organically, or did you receive mentoring, or what?
No, I kind of had to learn hard. I was one of the guys who went to Google and did what does an architect actually do, because this is what happened. I've been with Veepee for 13 years, so I've been there for quite a while. I've seen it with a 15-people team go through from the tech part to the 1,000 that we are today. So I've seen all shapes and colors on this one. And I went from a standard developer with 3 years experience up till technological expert on, guess what, Microsoft, because that's what we had back then, to this changing environment where all of a sudden you had to learn and teach people a lot of new things, where I started doing flexibility and much more coaching and much more vision. And then, well, you came into the Private came into the picture, and the other companies we got in the picture, and all of a sudden I was doing way more, how do we couple systems together, and helping people get to where they were and doing way less in production. So it wasn't like a big promotion or anything. It's just one day someone said, you are an architect. And I said, I don't like architects, but that's what you're doing today. So, okay. So it was really gradual, really, really gradual.
So basically makes sense, just one last question, basically makes sense that for people that aspires to be an architect has to be very much acquainted of the technology that is working on the company right now, because it's easier to make decisions of something that you already know and have a very good, not coming from an external company and doing the jump from development to architect, or does it work, or I don't know. Does it make sense, the question?
I think I understand what you're getting at. But because my path went through expertise in technology and then I switched over. But I think that's only one path, and it's not the fact that I was an expert in my stack that made me become an architect. It was the curiosity to look outside and to see what happened outside and take a step back. Like, for me, software architecture going up to enterprise architecture, it's a matter of Russian dolls. The principles you apply are always the same. It's always the same. Look at components that fit together and make sure that they don't pollute each other and connect systems together. So this works on a base software level when you're doing one single application, but it works on the bigger scale as well. It's always a matter of taking one step back.
Thank you.
I am trying to add in something, if it's possible, to what you said, and I totally agree. My experience as well is based upon basically curiosity. So you start looking at other technologies and you start checking the stuff that, I mean, for me, software architecture is about metaphors, and checking other technologies communicates other metaphors. So you start thinking about them, and someone in the company will take into account the fact that you are starting to think architecturally. And in that moment, maybe you are proposed to be a software architect. but it starts with the curiosity, in my experience.
Yeah, is right. This so you start with one tech stack and try to introduce new things, to try to change things, to do the stuff in better way, to learn new things, and at some point you are an architect. You are working as an architect, maybe with the role of developer, but you are acting as an architect, and at some point say, hey, I'm an architect. They say, okay. That was more or less my experience.
There's a concept. I'm sorry, I'm a programmer, and there's something I always go first when I have something before me, and it's the release history. I'd like to know, what have you seen with the concept of architect during your professional career? When did you start hearing about architecture, and what was that, and how has it evolved? Because I think this is important. This is a concept that lets us understand what's actually an architect.
So it's an interesting question, because I think the answer changed a lot in the last 10 years, because the way we do things changed, not because the technology changed, actually. Like agile and products and short development cycles and more autonomy and more respect and so on. Like if you look back, not even that far ago, 10 years is not that far away, we were all doing V-cycles developments, right? The plan was set at the start, and we start working, and 6 months later we deliver something. And you can only do this if you have a specific map. So back then, and I think that's part of why I hated architects so much, because you had zero flexibility and zero choice in the matter. Like, there's a map, this is the technology you're going to use, and this is what you're going to do, now do it. And you just code, right? Which is fine, start. It gets boring very quickly. Today, when you want to release something and you want to push something into production every week or every 2 weeks, the team needs to be completely autonomous, right? And it needs to be able to make snap decisions, need to be able to change things very quickly. So the role of an architect becomes way less of a decision-making role and a future-proofing role or anything like that. And it's more of a, it gets more of a mentoring, making sure that you're going to the right direction, and more of a helper role, and way less of a deciding role. That's at least the way I'm seeing things today. I think it's been a few years since I met an architect that still works in Ivory Tower again and just punches plans down. Today you're here to help as an architect. You're not here to make massive decisions. I'm not going to lie, it still happens when sometimes you need to slam the table and say, okay, this is enough and we need to move forward, but that's more of an experience point of view and not of a role point of view. You've been there for 13 years and you've worked on things for a while, so you actually know how things work. And it's not your role that is punching the table, it's the person you are and the experience you have with the company, and it's common sense. It's not saying, I'm the architect, I decide, that's not the point. It's Thomas, I've been here for a while, and I think we're making a mistake. Two very different things, two very different things. I don't know, does that answer your question? Yeah?
In my experience, I have been working for 25 years more or less. When I started as a programmer, things were totally different. The role of an architect didn't exist. I became a programmer, then analyst, but the job I was doing then is more or less the same job I'm doing now with another technology, another paradigms, but the job is more or less the same. So I think you are not an architect because you have the role. You are an architect because the job you do to try to I don't know, connect things, learn new things, introduce new technologies, learn, and the most important, forget things that were true some years ago and they are not true anymore, things like that. This is the most difficult. Not learn new things, but forget old things and try to renovate anytime, okay? But about software architecture, I've been hearing for 7, 8 years, more or less. Before that, nobody knew about software architecture or what is this.
Maybe Microsoft TechNet is quite old. I mean, I think the culture of software architecture.
A lot of architects at Microsoft, a lot of them.
So I wanted to go to this point, and once a chief architect of an architecture department where I was working said, okay, what's architecture? Because there was another department and they were stepping feet. So he said, architecture is not business. All you think not business is architecture. When you code from business, that's architecture. Okay. That's a concept. I see you don't agree. So this and the aspirations you have to learn. For me, a programmer and an architect are people who have to create value for the client. Okay? Maybe one doesn't need to know much about the business and the other one needs to know a lot about business. But it's not about learning things, because they all have to learn things if they want to create value. And the evolution, do you think you have to aspire to be an architect? You have to aspire to be if you are tier 1 architect or developer, you have to aspire to be a tier 2, a tier 3, and if you think you're able, tier 4, not everyone can. Okay, but is an evolution up, going from developing to architecture?
Well, in the first time, I said that to me, to be an architect is not a military degree. So it's about, I repeat myself, it's about architectural thinking. It's a way of thinking, I think, that we normally share a little bit. And it's about software metaphors. I mean, stuff that we can communicate in a metaphor, for example. Well, one example which is pretty technical, and I think everybody here knows the Docker as a tool. Well, I think that the architect of Docker had a very clear metaphor in his or her mind, because it's very clear, the metaphor. And when you use Docker, you understand the metaphor before understanding the commands, and so this is one. I mean, it's not tool-based, it's about logical thinking about metaphors, for me. It's if I had to aspire to something, it would be architectural way of thinking. It won't be an architectural vacant in some company.
So, David and I, we are on the same hierarchy level as all the developers in the company, right? So there's no tier or level structure. It's a different role. It's just something that's needed right now, right? Honestly, in the best of world, you wouldn't need us, because everyone would have the same degree of knowledge and the same vision on everything. It's just all the architects you have right now are people who've been here for a while and have a larger vision and are able to take a step back. So it's more of a question of experience. It's not a question of level or anything. I mean, like David said, and we both pretty much said the same thing. It's not that we wanted to become architects. We just landed there at some point because it was needed at the time. So to answer your question short, no, for me it's not a level thing, and it's not a strive. Like David started off very provocatively saying, why do you want to become an architect, right? He started off with this. So we both have a pretty much vision. It's a job that needs doing. Now, is it better than development? No. The most important person in a tech company is the developer. Like if you don't realize this yet, then you haven't understand what you're doing. The most important part is the developer. It's not the architects, not the CTO, it's the dev. And that's not just political garbage. It's true. It's true. And we are on the same level as the developers. Like I have the same manager as the developers I work with. So flat structure.
In fact, the difference is if you like really coding, then you don't want to be an architect. We code, we do some proof of concept, sometimes libraries or sometimes whatever, but our main role is not to program things. This is what the developers do. Okay, the architects have different vision. For example, in my tribe, I have 5 products, each with different technology. One is Java, the other is Node.js, the other is Go, the other is C#, and it's impossible. I cannot know all these technologies to help them, but my vision is I can help them not in the coding part, but in another thing like adopting pipelines, guidelines, testing, because it's the same in more or less all the languages, okay? But if what you really like is coding, is programming, then you don't want to be an architect.
No, don't say you don't want to be an architect, just be aware that you're going to do way less of it than you used to.
Yeah, it's about the question. I just want to make a short disclosure, or how to say, reveal some information about the levels. Actually, they exist, but they exist in some companies, not here. I agree with everything was said before, but in other company, EPAM, for instance, it is a 5th level. So architect is level 5. So level 1 junior, level 2 developer, level 3 senior developer, level 4 team lead or tech lead. Basically, if you tech lead, level 4, then you can go to level 5 architecture, which is more technical stuff. And if you team lead, you can go to delivery management, also level 5, but more soft skills direction. And when you level 5, you're architect, you should be architect in one tech stack for sure. For instance, for backend, you might be architect in Amazon Web Services, but then you might proceed to another tech stacks, and then you will, how to say, improve as an architect to other levels with multiple tech stacks. So they exist, but in some companies, but mainly it's about your attitude. Yes.
So I have a multiple part question. The first one is, do you think a development background is required to be an architect? Or if you're just good at thinking abstract concepts and analyze abstract subjects, you're good at the job by definition?
I'm actually scared of the second part of the question.
I'm not going to name names.
So yes, for me it's completely necessary to have a background in development to actually be an architect. Yes.
Why is that?
I agree.
Why?
And the same for me. For me, it's required not only to be a programmer, is to be a good programmer, okay? To know how to apply good practices, how to create an application from scratch, with or without frameworks, and so. You need that background because it's different level, but the abstraction are the same.
So I think I know where you're getting with this. You don't need to be an expert when you're an architect. So it's good because you're talking with tech people, and we all know tech people only respect other tech people. That's just the reality of things. Now, when you're an architect and you talk, especially on my level, when I'm doing like enterprise architecture, I'm doing a lot of very high level stuff, and technically being an expert on .NET doesn't matter anymore. It really doesn't matter because I'm completely relying on the excellent devs that we have to actually do the tech analysis and the jobs, right? Because they are the ones carrying the architecture that you're proning, right? I don't need to be this anymore. However, to actually understand and do my job correctly, I need to know how software works. This is very important, and you can't understand how software works if you haven't done development to an extended degree. Right? You can understand how this application works. Yes, this works. How software works is very different to understanding how this software works. Does it make sense?
Yes, makes sense. But how do you make sure you, as you spend a lot of time working on abstract subjects, talking to people, analyzing systems, that you keep your hands on the, you stay on the ground basically? Do you think for example, some architects believe they have to reserve some time to code? Do you think it's important?
Yes, and we don't do it enough. That's the long and short of it, right? In the perfect world, architects would have the time to participate in sprints on the teams they work with, right? That was the vision that we talked about when we started working on architecture. Like, again, our company is split up. We all have like six teams that we coach, lead, and so on. And the idea at the start was every month or so, we participate in a sprint. We commit code, and we push code into production. That was the pitch. Now I'm down to a time where I see my team 1 day out of 5, because sometimes I have to travel, and sometimes I have to work on other things. So on a time perspective, and realistically, going this low is not feasible without impacting the team that you are contributing to. Because I know that if I was going to contribute to a team today, I would slow them down, and I would kill their velocity, and that's not the point, right? Just to fill my ego, that doesn't make sense. So how do you fix this? Personally, I cheat. I have a couple of tools that are still in production that I maintain under the radar, which is bad because I'm a massive bottleneck. But I still need my hands in production somehow and keep them dirty. And yes, like everyone else, I look at stuff in the weekend and I do play around with sandboxes and things like this. Like my best friend today is our lead SRE because he's playing around with new things and then he pushes something here. Can you try Rancher 2? Well, working with Cube, we want to move over there. Yeah, gimme. And then you start playing around with it because it's your job as an architect to make sure that everything works. But it's more of an excuse to actually put your hands in there and look at how it runs, because I can't have the luxury of slowing my teams down when I commit to them. So it's a lot of personal work and it's a lot of scheduling. It's really difficult.
So basically, if you want to be an architect and you want to stay technically relevant, you have to spend your weekends coding.
Right now, yes, but that's more of an ecosystem thing and not it's not going to be like this in every company. Just a bit of background. We bought, Vente-privee France bought 4 companies, and we are in the process of merging everything together. Like, if you've done this already in tech, that's one of the hardest things you will ever do. So yes, today we don't have the time to do this properly, and we take the hits, right? Someone needs to take the hit, so we take the hit. In a normal company, makes me sound all high and mighty. That's not the point. When you schedule your work properly and it's not so insane as what we're doing right now, you should be able to carve out time to do this on company time.
Thank you.
I would like to spend a few more words on this because my case is a little bit different from there, I think, in the sense that I'm a little bit tech-oriented and even because of my personal interests, I'm quite interested, for example, in the design of statical typed languages. So I touch and on daily basis also the system operations. So, and but I wanted to answer your question about why an architect should be a technician as well. And to me, it's because, and I want to use the words of Martin Fowler here, an architect harvests from experience with developers and generalize. So you need to know the technical details, I think.
I'm talking about if we spend the weekend coding or not. I do, but because I like. But what I do in the weekends is not the same what I'm trying to study here. When I'm here, I try to book some meetings with myself to study new technologies. I cheat. Okay, so, but those technologies are oriented to something that we could use in the company. And what I do in my weekends usually is only for fun.
I have a question. Imagine that you are in an architecture meeting of a new product. You are in a project developing a new product, and you are in an architect meeting. And which topics would you talking about, and which people should be involved there? It's the real life. What do you do?
So that depends on how. Is it the first meeting? Is it the first time we're talking? Is it like the kickoff or something like that?
No, in the middle of the.
In the middle. So we
yes.
already know how the project is going to connect to everything else?
It's supposed,
Okay.
but
So
maybe not.
The question, why am I asking the question is because you're going to have, well, at least the way we work is we have multiple instances where we interact with the project team when we are needed, like to give guidelines. The first question you're asking, there's zero technology involved, is this product we're developing, does it fit into an existing ecosystem and does it connect to something else? If yes, how and what does it contribute and where does it start and where does it stop, pretty much. So it's more high-level stuff, like what do you get in, what's your input, what's your output, what do you do inside? You start drawing a few boxes, but there's no tech involved. We are not talking about any technical constraints. It's more high-level stuff of how the flow is actually going to work. If everyone agrees on this, and by the way, not everyone always agrees on this on the first one, so it can actually take time to say, no, it starts there and it ends there. The frontiers are often a bit blurry. Once you've done this, you can start talking of how you're going to do it. So if you're talking about a product, a real product which is autonomous, which has a lead developer, a lead PO, the architect should almost not be involved. Like what he should do is show up and say, by the way, these are your constraints. And constraints are like, you can, in the worst case, you can choose between all these technologies. In the best case, please don't use these technologies because a couple of them we don't want to support. And I'm here if you need me. But it's, I'm here if you need me, right? The architecture should be proposed and drafted by the lead developer. The architects need to look at it to make sure that he's not gone crazy, but it's not the architect who's driving this discussion. It's a product discussion. The product is owned by the product owner and the lead developer, so you just have to suggest things. Now, the lead developer is going to do architecture, and he's going to do real software architecture, coming up with components, what kind of stack he's going to use, probably do a design doc if he has to. So this is things we can help him with as architects because we've done this for a while. So we can show him, but he's the one who's going to do it. We are there to help, control, but not push things down the throats of lead devs.
Yeah, but I think that is the other side. So I think that the architect should push the other people to solve the problems or to investigate what is the problem and then what is the constraint and ask to you, because sometimes each team works independently and they need an architect to control them.
Yeah.
So the architect has
when
to
you say
push
control,
them.
what part? What part does he need to control? The technological part, the way they're doing things inside of the product, or the way it interacts with the rest of the world?
The way they interact.
This I completely agree with you.
They don't know how to join each part.
Okay, but this I agree with you. Like the first meeting, when you're talking about flows and how it all interacts, yes, the architect needs to be there because he's technically the one who is going to spot you missed something or you need to talk to these people. This I agree with you. But once we're going into the product itself and we're talking about design of the application and so on, the architect, again, in my mind, is there to control, not to push things. Like he has an agenda, of course. We're all evil masterminds and we have agendas. But it's more about technology and things we want to constrain rather than enforce, right? At the end of the day, my goal is like when I was a developer, I want to work the least amount possible. To be able to work the least amount possible, I need other people to do my job. The first in line are the lead developers. Lead developers need to learn my job so I don't have to do it anymore and they can do it for me. So empower them, make them work, and focus on the thing where you can get the most value, which is talk to the other teams and make sure that it actually interacts with the rest of the system.
Yeah. And for me, the architect should not be the police for the team. Should be people who help the team. If the team asks help, of course, the architect can help. And it depends on the maturity of the team, of course. If it's a very junior team, the architect should be more involved to help them to take the, I would say, right decisions. But if it's a mature team, it's better to ask them if they need help, better than impose your way of doing things. okay? Because you have to trust in your developers. If not, then they won't trust you too, and it will be, this is a mistake, okay? For me, you don't have to be the police of the team. You have to be the mentor, the person who helps them to, and if they ask for help, of course, I try to do my best. But I don't think I should impose my ideas in front of them because they know the reality of the product. I can, as Thomas say, constrain some things and say, don't do this because, don't use MySQL because we prefer to use Postgres because of this, of this, of this. Okay, but the tool is for the same. But if they want to do synchronous versus asynchronous, whatever, it's better to let them to take their own decisions.
Sorry, I think, and I think now that maybe enforcing those qualities that you mentioned is different from the concept of imposition. So you can enforce something without imposing, and based on my experience at Apiumhub with liquid or fluid teams and different projects and so on, I think I come back to the concept of focusing in order to to check if there are problems in every team. You know, I need to do this without imposing, but questioning everything. It's not imposing; it's questioning, and going to the truth if there's a problem or not, and if there's a problem, that's where I can help. Maybe
you are not a police, of course, but sometimes I think that dev leads or developers, they don't know how to solve something, and they make up a solution that is not a weak solution, and it's not maybe the one that architect should propose. But as you say, you have to question to make them think which is the solution.
Exactly, yes. Exactly. I think if not, I mean, architecture is failing at some point.
It's just it was mentioned that architects have a police and everything, and what I don't hear is mentioning that, well, as usually architects come from the tech side, and they are usually in a position to talk with the business and to actually protect the team from some business decisions, you know, because usually in software it's always the push, because who pays for the development is the business. So they want something fast. And doing this, if you let them do it, they do it taking a lot of shortcuts. What in architecture is called, well, technical debt that can exist on various levels, no? So there is some decisions that architects actually have to protect the team from these decisions, and they have a leverage sometimes because you are a senior developer and you have the same idea, but when you are architect, they listen to you. So I think it's better to see this position as, well, to help everybody, to help some people from shooting themselves in the foot and then, you know, do some bad things with the dev team, and for dev team also to be a bit happier to have some more time on doing some development. So I think it's not like fighting over tech decisions, but helping the dev team have more time to make better tech decisions. Okay?
I think we have time for one last. It's not a really question. To explain to my family and to every people, I saw architecture. I'm an architect to the future. Like Gaudi, it's a cool architect for the Sagrada Familia. It's fine, he can do everything. You can do everything when you are an architect. You can thinking about many people, many things. You know many language. But the idea of architecture for me, it's really to find the best solution for your company. And like I told to my students, you need to know many language, but you need to understand the people. And the people that they are you need to be open-minded. So soft skill is very important, but you need to open-minded to understand every complex idea, because women and men are different, they're thinking differently. And it's that the idea of architecture is the future. That's it, I think. Do you think it's my vision clear, or
yes.
you have another point?
No, for sure. I mostly agree. Yeah.
I think that's it because we're running out of time. So sadly, this needed to end at some point. I think Ivan wanted to say something.
Yes, this is the last call for the raffle. So if you guys are interested in winning a free course in Apium Academy, that's your opportunity. So just fill out this. I have some pens here if you want, and just leave it here, please.